Okay, so I'd like to welcome all of our listeners to another episode of the UXR Minds Podcast. And before we do begin, I just want to remind all of our listeners that if you haven't already and you haven't given us a rating on whichever platform you're listening to this podcast, then if I can encourage you to do so, it means a lot to see all of your feedback. And also, I know if I need to improve something. So go ahead and do that if you can. And also, obviously, give us a follow on the platform that you listen to this podcast or watching this podcast or YouTube or even on LinkedIn. So today we've got another interesting guest on, Darinka Buendia. She is a lead design researcher or UX researcher, but also a founder and podcaster herself of the UXRMX Podcast. And if I understand correctly, a community which is predominantly in Mexico and Latin America. And you do quite a few things, I can see, workshops, conferences, etc. So looking forward to getting to know you better and also what you do better. So thanks for coming on.
Sure. Thank you then for the invitation.
No problem at all. So obviously I've given a small introduction, your titles and kind of what you do, but would you mind just sharing a bit more about who you are, how you got into the position that you are now, obviously with your career, and then maybe we can move on to the podcast later.
Yeah, sure. Well, as you were saying, I'm a UX researcher since 2017, I think so. It's almost 8 years now.
Wow.
And yeah, I've been here for a long time, I think so. And the last 5, 6 years of my life, I've been working in finance for a couple of banks, the biggest banks here in Mexico and Latin America and also Spain. And also my main purpose to build this community and do the podcast and be able to talk with you from another part of the world and different time zones. It's because UX research has been not only my work, my daily work, but also my discipline and the purpose of be able to help another people as well. Not only my colleagues, but also how UX research works to find answers and be able to take better decisions and choose better paths in order to build better products, better services, and so on. And also, I really enjoy to be able to share knowledge. I'm a teacher as well, and I think, those activities correlated very well and they live together. So cool. So yeah, this is me, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I must confess, it feels very different to be able to be, the guest and not the host.
I know.
So yeah, that's a cool switch.
Yeah.
And yeah, in a few words, that's me.
Cool, very nice. Thanks for your introduction. And yeah, I know what what it's like. I prefer being on this side of the microphone. I actually just was interviewed in another podcast just before our recording now, and yeah, it's really strange. I'm not as comfortable.
Yeah, yeah. But it's okay. I mean, you have to. Yeah.
Exactly. That's true. That's really nice as well, hearing your experience. And also, I completely vibe with the teaching aspect. My background is in teaching as well. So, and I completely agree, like teaching and that kind of relationship between student and teacher and all that, it correlates really well with being a researcher, especially in UX. So, yeah, completely agree. In terms of why you became a researcher, is it something that you've always done? Like, it's a strange question because I don't think many children grow up wanting to be UX researcher. So it's an interesting journey for everybody into UX research. So what happened in your early career? What did you do studying? How did you end up where you are now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'm a psychologist. I'm not a designer. So I think that's one of the biggest changes in terms of how people get into these careers.
Yeah.
And since I was a child, as you were saying, I was curious. very curious. I was always looking forward to know so many answers and asking all those uh, uncomfortable questions.
Mm,
And I think that stays forever. I think so. And the other thing that worked for me was that in college, my university has this formation that you can be a researcher. It doesn't
mm,
matter whatever are you studying.
yes.
And in psychology as well, it was a huge deal to be able to understand how people, behave and how
Mm,
people are asking those questions.
yeah.
So for me, that was uh, really important to be able to translate in order to, you know, be a better person and also be a better professional.
Mm,
And yeah, that was my first approach in college. And then I was looking for be able to do some practice in psychology, but I was really hopeful in the beginning because I wasn't thinking about how difficult can be for some people to open their minds and their hearts and be able to accept that they need help.
yes.
So I was thinking that maybe I should first take some therapy as well and also be able to research some techniques and some approaches and some of those um, topics that can actually help me at the beginning.
Mm,
And one thing led me to another. And at that time, I was um, having this partner, and he was a designer and he was a UX designer,
mm,
and he is actually right now, and he's one of my biggest friends right now. I mean, even though the relationship doesn't work the
no,
way that we think of,
sure.
um yeah, we get in some good terms. And
That's good.
he was looking for some information, and he was like, oh, do you hear something called UX research? And I was like, no, I don't have any idea of that. Tell me more about it. And he started to talk with me about these topics and the relation between
Mm,
my professional skills and the UX researcher skills. And he was like, you should try. I think you are doing some of the things that you are actually doing right now in
mm,
your profession. And I was like, yeah, maybe. And that was the beginning of it. And I start doing some interviews and looking for some information about UI and
mm,
design. I mean, I felt always really attracted to the design
mm.
careers, but here in Latin America and Mexico, they are very expensive.
I see.
So for me, it wasn't really a choice because
Mm,
my whole um, college and actually high school and so on, I was always working and
yeah.
studying. So yeah, that wasn't really a real like an option. So I thought, well, maybe I should go for something that it's reliable and I can pay for it.
Mm,
So the one thing led me to another, and 8 years later, here I
mm,
am. And it was the best decision. I think
mm,
it was meant to be, even
yeah.
though I don't think in sort of cosmic and things and so on.
No,
I'm
no.
no, I'm a really rational and science woman. So yeah, I think that path was building with step by step, and right now I'm really happy. I can say that I'm not only a researcher for 9 to 5, but also in my free time, as you can see, I'm talking about it and I'm teaching
Mm,
about it. And yeah, this is something that I really enjoy.
that's nice. That's nice. It's also nice to hear your passion come across in your voice for the field, because yeah, if sometimes if you're only doing it as a job, you can do it, but it's also nice when it's something that you also love doing, and as you're doing with obviously your podcast and this community that you've built, you can really see that that passion is something you want to instill in others. It's also a nice maybe moment to pass over into that topic. So You are obviously the founder and podcaster, host of the podcast UXRMX. How did that come about? And also, what does it do? Because I noticed on LinkedIn that it's not only a podcast, but it also does other things as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, it started like everything else, like something that it's like an idea. And I was with a good friend. He was my producer at the beginning of the podcast because, as I was saying, I'm a psychologist. I'm not a designer, of course. I'm not a communicator, and I don't even have, like a formation about how to produce a podcast
Yeah.
or be able, even though, to lose that microphone fear or
Yes.
not feel comfortable with the idea of speaking louder and be able to grab a voice. And this amazing friend, uh, I was listening for so many years, so many podcasts from so many topics.
Mm.
And the first time that I record a podcast was about something else, like a cartoon or something like
Oh, wow.
that. Yeah, and I think that was like for 3 or 4 times. And
Mm.
he was like, you should do a podcast. And I was like, you're kidding, and that's not possible. And even if I was to build a podcast or something, I don't even know what this going to will be about it. So that's not possible. And my first year as a UX researcher in a bank,
Mm.
it was really complicated. It was so hard because I start as a specialist, and
Mm.
I was working on a place that it was only for UX researchers. And I mean, it was a completely different place from other people that start on,
Mm.
because my whole colleagues were researchers and we were allowed to do full studies from so many agencies and organizations and so on. So I started really, really good, right, really well.
Mm.
And then I did the switch from a big organization, and it was completely different. And I felt so bummed, and I was like, no, this is not good, this is not happening. And I have so many and so many questions and so many doubts, and I was like, I need to talk with somebody, and I need to be able to understand if this is something common, and this is something that I will face for the rest of my life, and if this is it, how and
Mm.
when and why, and
Yeah.
all those questions. So my friend, the podcast producer, was like, "Yeah, you should. If you have those questions, maybe you should be able to do that to your colleagues
Mm.
and just press record and see what happened."
Yeah.
And I was like, "No, I don't think so, but well, maybe." And if you can hear the pilot, it's awful. I hate it, and my voice is all squeaky, and the sound, it's awful, and the production, terrible. But I actually love that first episode because you can hear the fear and you can feel the doubt and all those
Mm.
weird things.
Yes.
But the first person that I actually interviewed was my boss,
Ah,
my
okay.
former boss from this place that it's
Mm.
called Punto Lab.
Mm.
And she was like, "Yeah, sure, let's talk about it," because I was feeling a little bit guilty about leaving the company because I
Mm.
was having a better opportunity, a better work opportunity. And
Sure.
she was like, "Yeah, don't worry, let's talk about it, and let's, be able to talk about what UX research is and so on."
Mm.
And I did that pilot and come back with my producer. Well, actually was my friend. And then I said to him, "Well, this is it. Listen to it and let me think. Let me know what would you think."
Mm.
And he was like, "Yeah, it's really cool, and we can work with that."
Yeah.
And yeah, after that, actually, he, as a producer of the podcast, had this studio with these microphones, like professional ones.
Oh,
And yeah, the actually after that, my two first seasons, they are really good produced. They
mm,
have this specific sounds and this
mm,
engineering and sound, and yeah, it was awesome. And my friend told me we can do this exchange.
mm,
You help me with your research from my company and my other programs as well,
mm.
and I will produce your
Oh, wow.
podcast. What do you say? And I was like, let's do it. And that was 2019.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, the first season, actually, I start to gather all these reference and professionals with huge names. And
Mm,
I was like, they will say no. And every single one of them say, yes, of
yeah.
course, I will do it.
Mm,
And they all came to the studio, and I was like feeling like a huge impostor at the beginning because I mean I was a UX researcher, a normal one,
mm,
and I think that gave me so much confidence about my skills as a interviewer and gathering insights and connect the dots.
mm.
And I was like, oh my God, I think I'm doing UX research about UX research.
Yes.
And that was, yeah, like, okay, I think I can learn something about this.
Mm,
And I mean, I was the first podcast in Mexico and in Latin America that
oh,
started this.
mm,
And the second year, it was, like a huge boom, and
wow.
every one of my colleagues were doing podcast. And yeah, it was pretty cool to see that.
Mm,
And at the second season, I was, maybe I should pause this. I'm overwhelmed. And
yeah.
yeah, it was something so fast and also so big in the beginning. And then it was like, maybe I should do a pause. And the colleagues and the people and they were like, hey, we're not doing the podcast anymore. Hey, I want to go to talk
Mm.
about this. And I was like, okay, I started something and I should be able to keep
Awesome.
continuing with that.
Mm,
And yeah, fast forward, this is the 6th year of my podcast.
wow.
Even though my colleagues start to grow and be able to build their own platforms and their own communities. Also, my producer want to work to something else bigger and better. And he was like, I can't do this anymore, but I can teach you how to edit and how to do the things that you need to do in order
Yeah.
to build this content. And I was like, yeah, sure, don't worry, just show me the specifics for Logic Pro, and
Mm,
yeah, I can do that. And he teach me that and taught me that, and he was um, a huge pillar for this, and I'm always grateful to
mm,
him because he pushed me when I was afraid and I was thinking that nah, maybe this is not something that it would help me with my career. Of course, that helped me a lot
mm,
because after that things start to happen, such as bigger conferences and workshops, and
mm,
I start to do my own um, courses,
yeah.
and also universities and college and
Wow.
communities start to reach me out, and maybe you can teach here and that. And I was like, yeah, sure. So of course the podcast start all of it.
Mm,
And if you ask me, I'm still doing it because I love talk with people as a
yeah.
researcher of colors. I love to exchange point of views and learn from another people.
Mm,
And yeah, that's why I'm doing
wow.
this, and this is how the podcast started.
Wow. It's a beautiful story. And again, I can see your passion throughout you explaining how the podcast came about. It's also beautiful as well to see that even halfway through you, or early on, you wanted to stop, but just due to like the support that you had, it helped you continue, and obviously now it's led to bigger and better things. So in terms of like these conferences and workshops, are they things that happen regularly? Because obviously here in, I don't know, in the English speaking world of Europe or the States, like obviously I saw your podcast online and I just initially thought it was only a podcast for like the Spanish speaking community, but obviously now I've learned there are also conferences and things. So how often do they happen? And if anyone does want to attend, how can they go about finding out
Yeah.
this information?
Yeah. Well, of course, the beginning, it happened a lot more than now. And I
Mm.
think it was also because when I was younger, I was,
You're still
uh,
young.
l- yeah. Well, I mean, I was a little bit naive in
Okay.
terms of how can I help and how can I approach people and be able
Mm.
to share what I know. And the thing that you were saying about how USA and Europe and Canada works, it's completely different and
Yes.
from Mexico and Latin America. And at 2019, I attend this conference from UX Research Conference,
Oh.
and I was I was really intrigued about, well, this is cool. This sounds
Mm.
exciting and perfect and so on, but in my country it doesn't happen that
Mm.
way. We
Yeah.
don't have the resources, we don't have the budget, we don't have the time, we don't have the knowledge, we don't have even, these specific profiles such as UX researcher.
Mm.
We are more like a generalist profile such as
Mm.
UX UI designer or service designer that are actually doing A, B, C, D, and so on.
Yes.
So as a specialist, I was aware of my privilege and I was aware that my profile was a little bit different
Mm.
than so many things that I was actually saw in my country.
Mm.
So I went to this conference and I was like, I need to understand how to translate all of this, but for my people, for my colleagues, for my context.
Yes.
So as I was saying to you that I was doing some UX research on my podcast,
Mm.
I start to work on um, this specific case
Mm.
study, and I apply for that conference for the next year, the
Ah.
2020. And I apply, I sent my solicitation, and they were like, "Yeah, cool, go for it and explain your case."
Ah.
And then I realized that I was choose to be a main speaker,
Oh, wow.
and I was like, "Oh, no, no, no." I mean, for so many reasons, but I think the biggest one was because English is not my main language, as you can notice. And
No, I don't notice though.
no, but I was like, I was felt so insecure, and I was like, how
Mm.
I'm even go to talk to these people that are actually doing better than I am, because for so many things, and the
Yes.
imposter syndrome and so many things happening at that time. But I was preparing for the conference, and um one of my colleagues were like, you shouldn't be able to worry about it,
Mm.
you just need to do it. So as the podcast, so as the all the things that you were doing, just think about that exactly just the same.
Mm.
And I was like, yeah, sure. And of course, 2020, we all know what happened.
Yeah,
And
great
that
world.
conference, yeah, that conference, that it was actually going to happen on Canada and Toronto. Um, it happened virtually, and
Yeah.
it was called UX Research Conference Everywhere. And they were like online. And one guy came to my house and record the whole thing. And I was like, that was awful. And actually, I can even see it because it's like,
Oh. I'm gonna
yeah,
look
but
for it now.
no, it's
At least
awful.
I'm
But
like,
then, actually, the main topic was the duty to build a community. That's the title of
Okay.
the keynote.
Sure.
And I was talking about the duty of building a community from us UX researchers is because if we don't build a community, if we don't gather in around and talk about what's different and what need to do in order to be considerate in our professions,
Mm-hmm.
we were just, hoping for the best, and that's not going to work. And
Mm-hmm.
I start to do some resembles and some comparisons between what actually my colleagues in US and Canada and Europe are doing and what actually have in our time. So the conference went well. I was really happy about the results at that time. Now that I'm remembering, it's like, of course, everything yet you do, um, it felt different with time.
Of course.
And that allowed me to have more presence in
Mm.
LinkedIn and in, of course, with my colleagues. And yeah, right now I'm still doing some courses, of course. Every year I do 3 times my course. It's called UX Research from um, methodologies from to practice,
Mm.
and I build some specific case studies from my students. Right now I think it's 21 generations of UX researchers
Wow.
since 2018 from now.
Wow.
And that's the main purpose of doing this. I
Mm.
hate a public exposition. I feel always uncomfortable for
Mm.
be able to put my face and be able to, yeah, that's
Sure.
why I choose a podcast,
Mm.
because that's the place when I feel more safe, because you can
Mm.
see me, but you can hear me, and
Sure.
I'm good with that.
Yeah.
I'm not feel good with, you know, putting my face on it and be able to,
Mm.
hi, I know that's never been the purpose of it. And that's
Yeah.
something that I actually fight
Mm.
constantly. And there are some times when I pause and
Mm.
I get back, and like I need some time for myself
Mm.
and be able
Yeah.
to, yeah, look for the distance.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, thanks for going into those vulnerabilities as well. I completely understand. Like, it's completely not my personality to do a podcast or anything like that. I felt like I had to do it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll have to edit that part. My screen disappeared. I don't know. Yeah, I felt like I had to do it because I did some writing. So, like my journey into UX research, I got a lot of support and help from various mentors, and one of the mentors suggested that I create a network and, let's say, a community of other learners. That way, you can obviously help you in the future to, through those connections, find work potentially, but also not feel alone when you are looking for jobs and you've got that community. And yet that kind of grew from there. So I had like quite a few people following my journey in some ways. And then someone suggested that I put this all down in writing. So I started, and then it turned into interviews. And eventually I was kind of forced into doing a podcast. But yeah, I completely understand. Like, I hate public speaking. It's just not I don't feel comfortable. But I focus on and I think it's the same with you as well. I focus on the good that it's doing in the community. And when I see others and they share how much they enjoy it or how it helped them in a specific way or a specific interview, and obviously getting people like you on can really help as well, or is the main kind of fountain of knowledge on this podcast. It really it makes you feel good that your little like part of this huge like community is having some good. And that's the thing that keeps me going. And yeah, thanks for sharing those vulnerabilities. It's also good for people to hear that are maybe in the job hunt, or they're looking and they feel uncomfortable about certain things, or that they need to do something to find work or to grow a community. You don't need to be that like super confident, extroverted person to do that.
Yeah.
It's normal
Yeah.
to have vulnerabilities and to allow them not to don't change yourself, but be who you are, and that will resonate with many people because many people feel the same way.
Yeah, totally. I mean, when people are actually, working with me on daily basis
Mm,
or starting to collaborate, they're always thought or some specific idea of you, like this host
yeah.
that it's always, so smooth voice and yeah, so cool, and they have all so control. And I was like, well, that's the Darinka's version of the podcast, and
Sure.
yeah, that's one. But the real one is someone that actually has doubts and
Yeah.
has no good days, and
Mm.
not be able to be so charming and so entertaining. Yeah, that happens a lot. And
Yes. Yeah.
but it's part of it. And as I was saying at the beginning, if you start to do this as a part of what are you looking or reaching for as a professional, I think
Mm.
it's really important to separate those uh, specific parts of you,
Yes.
because I mean, I've been here for almost 6 years now,
Mm.
and I learned that you have to do it on your own pace.
Mm.
And also, even though, as you were saying, you do this in order to help other people and create community and be
Yes.
supported, it also help you to your own boundaries and your
Of
own
course.
necessities, and also be able to understand how you were when you started and
Mm.
how are you evolving. um, and it's something that some people are actually even don't realize about that.
Yes.
And when I start to look for the first second season, and I was like, yeah, I was thinking about research in that way, and
Mm.
5 years later, I think it's something opposite, or even
Yeah.
it changed all the time.
Absolutely.
So it's good to have a record of that. It's good to
Mm.
have some of that in a testimony, and be able to see how
Absolutely.
people can change and be able to progress, and also yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a beautiful point as well. Okay. And I also want to, because you mentioned something before about how it is in Mexico or Latin America in terms of specializations or in UX research. Obviously, I'd be interested to know how it is now because I think you're referring to a few years ago when you were going to speak at the conference pre-COVID or during COVID in the end. Because that's also something I'm noticing here. So I'm based in Italy. And even now, that's something that's very difficult. If you want to find work here, as a UX researcher, it's very hard. Like most companies are quite immature in their UX standards or way to work and expect UX UI, famous as slash, or just like you say, service designer that does everything, or even a product designer that does research as well. So that can be sometimes hard, especially if some of our listeners I know live in various countries in Europe where it can be like that. Um, so it's kind of a two-edged question. So what is it like now in Latin America? So if there are any listeners that listen to my podcast, how can they position themselves correctly? Yeah, and also how have you found your roles in terms of being a UX researcher?
Yeah, well, of course, there's been changes from 2019 from now, but also I think the UX concept has been changing for some time right now, but the
Mm,
maturity and the knowledge that the organization has, it's merely the same.
mm,
And yeah, that's critical, because as a specialist, you start a job thinking that, oh, cool, I will do the best and give my best efforts, and
mm,
be able to translate all that I know in some specific details and choose better decisions and so on.
mm,
And the reality is that we're not there yet.
mm,
And it will be really complicated for me to say that it's going to change like from, day from night. And no,
mm,
but I can see that it has been changes. I mean, more people start to realize that the UX UI it's not working, and the generalist professions are like more like an emergency necessity,
Yes.
and not so the specific content that you are actually trying to reach in your organizations.
Mm,
Another thing that I saw is that more UX designers or UI designers are looking forward to growth and be able to know more about it,
mm,
but not just for, making more money or having
mm,
more competition in the industry. I
yeah.
think it has to do with understanding how to gathering this information and be able to pick their own battles
Mm,
in their workplaces.
mm,
Because when I teach my students how UX research works, it's not something that the book's telling you, because the book will tell you the methodologies and
mm.
tell you that design thinking is ABCDE. Well, that's cool. But in real life,
Yes.
your boss doesn't even care if you know ABCDE. He wants to
Exactly.
know C, or,
Mm,
something like that. So it's more like a real approach and a real point of view. If you understand the basics, you can actually go from a specific goal, but
mm,
that goal is going to change over time, and you will probably don't have ni the budget or the time or the specifics that you are actually need to reach in order to do your work better.
mm,
So yes, it's more, you will understand that it's going to be a huge necessity for a specific um, profile, such
mm,
as UX research or UX content or UX engineer right now, or product designer or service designer. But in the whole process, you will need research. That's
yes.
why I'm always saying that it doesn't matter if you are A, B, C, or D. You need to understand how research work,
Yes.
and you need to understand that in order to have a better results, you need to talk with your users,
Mm,
but not
yes.
only the final users. So
Mm,
also, you need to do um, the space problem, such as Indy Young was telling on her courses. You need to understand how your organizations are built and how your organizations are understanding research. If you're
mm,
not doing this specific crafting content and steps, your research is going to fail, and your
yes.
research it's not going to be very receptive or open to it. So
Mm,
I think that's one of the main differences that I see. And another thing that I actually notice is that organizations are like, yeah, we need research. I don't know what it is, but I need research.
yes.
And I hate this specific word that you need to evangelize or
Uh,
democratize, or I mean, this is not a religion. This
mm,
is not political content. This is something that you need to be able to deliver on the daily basis on your
mm,
work, and it's hard. That's
yeah.
why I see, great potential in so many designers that are actually like, yeah, I'm going to transform my career, and I'm not going to be a designer anymore. I'm going to be a UX researcher. And
Mm,
3 months later, they come back and like, no, forget it. It's so difficult. People are always ghosting me, and they're
mm,
like telling me that, no, we don't have time. We don't have, no. So how we change this uh, thinking of I need to evangelize, I need to be able to transform with the power of the words. No,
mm,
no, it doesn't work like that. You need to
mm,
be able to, pick your own battles, be
yes.
able to do specific efforts, and most of all, understand it that this is not personal. This
Mm,
is not about you as a person. This is
yes.
something bigger.
Yeah.
And that's something that I always telling the juniors and
Mm,
the students, like, if you choose to be a UX researcher, you need to understand that this is
Mm.
harder than other disciplines,
Yes.
because you need to be able to, stand back and also push forward. And it's something that it doesn't stays in just one place. You need to
Mm.
be able to, I mean, when I was younger, I have so many crappy jobs. I told these crappy jobs, such as a barista in a Starbucks.
Mm.
And when you start in a Starbucks, they have this position called floater. And a
Mm.
floater is someone, when they're like in a rush hour, be
Mm.
able to understand every step of the process on the line, on the preparation line. And you need to understand how you can help in every step of the line. If
Mm.
this is something that you have to do with the cashier, of making the coffee, or um, cleaning, or delivering, or
Yeah.
I always say research is something like that. You need to
Yes.
be able to start with this thinking as a floater,
Mm.
because I need to be able to help the content and the writer and my behavioral economics and my UI.
Mm.
So of course it's hard, because if you don't understand how the organization works and how are your colleagues, um, build this strategic
Mm.
point of work, you're going to feel,
Yes.
lost. And yeah, it's complicated. So be
Mm.
patient, be able to understand that this is not about you. This is
Mm.
about the whole organization, and the maturity of the UX industry as
Yes.
well.
Absolutely, yeah. You brought out so many good points in that. And yeah, I've noticed that as well. That, well, first of all, it wouldn't be called user experience if there wasn't any research, because how can you know what the experience of the user is like if you don't find out? So yeah, no, that's a really good point. And also, I like this idea that you mentioned at the end, the floater, because many times UX research, because of its title, UX just gets thrown with UX design. So especially a UX immature company will just say, okay, so we have UX researchers, UX designers in the product team, and you stay there, you live in your little in your little hole with them. But research can have so many other benefits, and I found in my previous roles that yeah, I worked with the designers, but I was also liaising with many other different teams, with marketing, with business, with sales, with various stakeholders, because research can help marketers understand who are our users, how are they thinking, how do they behave, etc. Or with the business team, they're speaking maybe with potential partners or clients. So you can also do research on businesses or etc. So yeah, that's something I feel as as UX becomes more mature within either countries, or as I mentioned before, in Italy and I don't know, in Mexico, Latin America, that's something that will come in time. But it's good if you are learning now to understand that that's how it works. And if you do get a role, to promote that thinking as well in the company. Can be hard if you're the only one, but kind of lay the groundwork and plant the seeds of how UX works and how beneficial research can be, not just for the design and supporting the designers, which is important, but and like presenting your research and doing research studies that can support the various teams. So yeah, I think that's a really good, and it would be beneficial also for our listeners that are in countries that aren't the UK or America, where generally speaking there are more specialist roles and maybe the maturity is general, not all the time, but generally is better. But these maybe Mediterranean countries where things are always 10 or 20 years behind the rest of these more advanced countries. But there are a lot of high potential UX researchers in these countries that might feel a bit lost. So thank you for bringing that out. And also, we're at the end, so thank you for coming on the podcast today and being on the other side of the microphone. I really appreciate it, and I hope for my listeners that maybe, I'm sure they have heard of your podcast, but if they are Spanish speaking, maybe in Spain, and they do want
Yeah.
to check you out, that I will post obviously all the links to your podcast and communities on all of the promotions I do. But yeah, again, thank you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have a couple of episodes in English, and I
Ah,
think, I
okay.
mean, yeah, I interview Steve Portugal.
Ah, yes, I saw
Um,
that one. That's the one I came
yeah,
across.
that was the last one, and also Indie Young, as I was saying.
Mm,
There's one with Erica Hall
ah,
that, yeah, I mean, I was looking forward to speak with those specialists and those reference
mm,
because you thought that these people is non-reachable or they are so difficult to be able to talk with. But I mean, they were like, yeah, of course, I can do it, and let's talk about it. And that's something that I really like about this community as a UX researchers in globally and
mm,
in general. We will always willing to understand and help how can we improve our practice, because as you
mm,
were saying, it's not the same in countries, that
yeah.
are actually building this from the beginning, and the people that are actually starting to look if there's something that we should do different, or
Mm,
in other ways. So yeah, if you can look for those content, they will be in the podcast. And thank you so much for this time and this invitation. So I'm glad to be able to speak with your community as well.
thank you. No, thank you to you, Darinka, and maybe we'll get you on in the future again. Who knows?
Sure.